Hey there, everybody. Carson here. Today, I'm very excited that we're welcoming Bhanu Pratap. Excuse me that I'm butchering the name,
It's
Bhanu.
it's totally fine. It's totally fine. Yeah. Yeah, you're doing
But
good.
how are you doing, man?
Uh, I'm doing good. As I told you just like a few minutes ago, like I'm traveling right now. So I'm living the life of a mildly vagabond artist. Mildly because I'm still at the studio, at a friend's studio, and just traveling to different places, like going for exhibitions and all, and also obviously working on my comics. Like that doesn't stop, like working on my work. So yeah, I'm doing good, doing all of this stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like an ideal life. And for people who don't know or haven't checked it out yet, I've found Banu's work with Dear Mother and Other Stories from Strangers Publishing, and I did a review on that. So this is my entire context for your work so far. But this is a wild book, man.
Oh, thank you. uh, yeah, it is. I never expected it to be this wild, like, but I also thought that it makes sense that if you're making work for yourself, like if you're making work in an indie space, it doesn't make sense to hold your punches, or you pull your punches rather and hold back. So I was trying to not pull my punches and just seeing where it kind of lands for me. So that's how like this thing came about. Like I just wanted to not worry about who will read, or like who the phantom reader is, this object, like whatever, like this ideal reader is, or trying to worry too much about uh, a lot of like critical response or something. So this was just me kind of really diving in and seeing like where it kind of goes, and I it kind of went into some interesting places. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's not easy work. And the thing that impressed me most about this, and I've been seeing some of the new work that you're putting up too, like the you just did one kind of fetishizing poop. um
Yeah, yeah.
it's that normally with this kind of work, I don't like it. I don't like things that get into the body horror or the poop or the kind of overly, I don't know, there's an over like darkness to it. But
Hmm.
your design and the way that you draw sells it so well, that it's like I have to respect it and I have to wind up liking it. So I'm wondering like where your approach comes from, because it's such a, I'm trying to find pages that I can show on YouTube. uh
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. There aren't a lot. Yeah, yeah.
but the here's the good one. The abstraction and the design of it really sells the whole thing. So that was one of the big things, is your approach to comics seems really different to me.
Okay. So I think for me, it's about like I think any like there is no subject which is taboo,
Hmm.
or like which is beyond the pale or beyond trying to grasp. Like as long as you can be, as long as you can be earnest about it, I think with a lot of works, I mean, of course there are plenty of exceptions, but with a lot of extreme works, a lot of um, like there seems to be at least one drive which is to kind of shock and awe, and trying to scandalize the reader, trying
Hmm.
to trying to get that reaction from the reader, uh, which I'm not particularly a fan of. Like I'm not particularly a fan of like edge lord humor and like trolley kind of stuff. I mean, I get that some people do it and they do it well, but for me, I think as long as you can kind of examine a thing from point of some earnesty, some honesty, there will be some like people will find a way in. People will find a way to relate, because a lot of these things, right, like body horror, body, or like your bodily functions, your sexual drives, your fantasies, your kinks, all of these things, right? Like they're pretty, like, I mean, of course, there'll be some cultural differences, but they're pretty universal also at the same time. Like, so if you have some obsession or something that you think about over and over again, or if you have some, I don't know, some, let's say, subconscious leanings or things that pull you in, there will be something like, so my point with that is that if you have that, there would be enough people who can kind of relate. I mean, of course, not everybody will, and that's fine for me. But I'm not trying to shock. Like, I'm not like, the work is not about shocking you or like, like getting that reaction. I'm not. I mean, even though some people, might say Aero Guru or something like that, like in the same realm or something like that. To me, I think the work is distinct in that sense, and also I do try to think about it from a sort of like a quasi philosophical way, where I'm not just where I'm trying to rather like trying to think about things, right? Like, so the poop comic, it happened right after I had this, I think, like really like a bad upset stomach, and like I was not able to function, and like my like gut was completely congested and all that. And I was just like, I was not able to move around. I could feel like this heaviness in my body. I realized that this thing was controlling me, like this thing which which we all kind of do every day. It's like the everyday for us. It's not, it's the everyday, but like the things that we don't discuss per se, like outside of, let's say, like our close friends or loved ones, or like most of us, only the doctor, if it comes to that, right? Like, it's just a thing. Like, you go to the toilet, you shit, and when you flush, like most of us don't even look at it. Like,
Yeah.
most of us don't even want to look at it. Like, we just flush it, and we like, it's a thing we don't want to talk about. But then the moment it kind of obstructs, right? Like, so many things come in, like medicine comes in, thought comes in, like when you can't move around like as you normally or typically would, it becomes like, it becomes a point to think about like what is happening to my body. So to me, I think a lot of it is, or this, but other thing also, like the sexual urges or something. A lot of it is like how it kind of, how it affects us, how it drives us to do things. How you, if you have certain things that you can't get your mind off for whatever reason, may just be something that happened in the childhood. It may be your like some trauma, some traumatic incidents or something. But we're all like driven to. There are enough things that we do, if not in a regular day, but like over a course of our time in our lives, where we do end up doing things which don't entirely make sense. Like, you have those moments of realization where you're like, oh shit, like, oh, I don't know, like, why did I do this? And you then try to justify, like, after doing the act. I mean, it could be I'm, I'm not talking just about like a moral justification, but otherwise also, like, oh, why did I open the door? Why did I do this? Why am I like doing certain things? uh, so instead of justification, what if it like, so my approach is like, I'm just trying to understand it rather than think about, like, rather than trying to find some narrative or some justification or some moral high ground with it, the whole thing. I'm just trying to just, like, as honestly as possible. I mean, if obviously there'll be bias, but as honestly as possible, just trying to drill at that. Yeah.
Yeah, that, I mean, that explains, that was my reaction to your work, is I didn't feel like you were trying to shock me, which with this
Hmm.
type of stuff was really impressive. And I think that's the work that turns me off, is I feel like someone's doing something just to be gross. And there was something
Yeah.
more poetic and thoughtful about your work, which was like, yeah, it was very hard for me to grab onto what that was that made it different for me. So that kind of philosophical outlook you is helping me understand a little bit, like what my reaction was. It's interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The philosophical bit, and or just trying to observe is I think, uh, I like that has to be one of the tools, I think, for an artist, that when you're not, I mean, of course, instinct is a big part of it. Like instinct is big part of my work as well. But at the same time, after the work is done, or like in the middle of the work, when you take a break, when you kind of have, uh, like we are trying to capture a lot of sublime, right? We are trying to capture a lot of things which are not like easily understood or easily. I think art's one of its primarily goal, like primary goal is, I think, trying to capture that, like the stuff that probably we cannot catch in our everyday language, and stuff that we cannot um, delve so easily, because the day gets in the way, like your life gets in the way, your, I mean, we all have like our, whatever, we have only so many hours in the day. So art kind of pulls you out of that. So that pulling out and then finding the sublime, and then finding uh, like what is this inexplicable thing or this imperceptible thing. So to me, like that point becomes very interesting, and obviously taboos in that sense become interesting as well, because they are sort of outside of the purview of the law, or like societal norms, or uh, like all of these things, right? Like very, very, like even something as simple, not simple, I mean, it's very complicated, but like something that is, let's say, as commonplace as sex work, right? Like it's not, it's hard to kind of have, unless you are a sex worker, or sex work, or in a community or something. It's hard to talk about it. It's hard to talk about like just what drives people, like to do other things, or like, so like sex work is the oldest, as they say, or the oldest, I don't know, I'm quoting from whatever the pop knowledge is like the oldest
Yeah.
profession.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yet it's just a thing that we don't talk about. It's just like, oh yeah, some people have sexual desires, and then they want to meet them, and there are people who are serving that, like, and that's it. And there's no, uh, like there, and that discomfort is also kind of interesting. Like the discomfort with these things, with discomfort with our bodies, and like, or even something as simple as like if you like go to a doctor, and then they kind of do some imaging or something, and you see the inside of the body. It's not you. It's not. I mean, it is you, but it's not. Like it's some other being. Like if you kind of zoom in or zoom out a little, you are beholding this alien object, but it's still you. So that gap again that produces, or is produced between what you think you are, and what we think language is, what we think, uh, modes of like thought and modes of being are. But there are these gaps that these gaps kind of, rather, these gaps become interesting to me. Like it is, I mean, there, I would say, like, even though I am saying like in a very arranged and philosophical manner, and like in a very like a thought out way in front of you, a lot of time is just, for me it's a lot of just compulsions. Like I am very interested in body. I am very interested in my own body, or like how it functions, how it, when it doesn't behave the way I want it to, or when it, like when I am, let's say, like something as simple as sexual attraction. When it happens, it happens. There's no control. Like, of course, after like some time, you can, like, either by masturbating or not, or just like chilling out, or whatever your way is. But in that moment, that compulsion is the thing that drives. So for me, a lot of these things are also compulsive. It's not only purely like a distant subject that I'm trying to study. A lot of this is also within me, as I guess it is with a lot of us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something else I think I really heavily identify that made me immediately attracted to your work. And I wonder now that you're talking about it, if you feel kind of the same, but I've always felt a bit at odds with my body, like
Mm.
trapped by it, or it's compelling me in ways that I don't want. And there's a sense of lack of control. And I've spent a lot of my youth wanting to escape body entirely. because of
Hmm.
those compulsions and things. And maybe that's like that kind of horror of even having the body. When I see your work like this and the way you distort it, there's kind of a beauty to the fleshiness, but also like a ick. And so
Some discomfort, or yeah.
yeah, do you have that same desire to like be completely non-physical at all?
I think I've had times. Definitely, I've had times where I've felt that the body was this other, like which is not me. And yeah, if there was if there was an option to opt out, let's say in some sci-fi kind of a scenario, some post or post human kind of scenario, I might consider it if nothing else, because yeah, there has always been personally a lot of sense of discomfort with myself, and at times I don't associate. Like at times when I look in the mirror, like it takes me. So I have, well, now I'm a little. I think with time I've grown a little more accustomed to my body, but there was a time where I would not take selfies, or I would not even look in the mirror. Like it would literally be that, let's say I'm walking in a mall and then I come across a mirror, and I would like it would be I mean few seconds, but a few seconds of like this depersonalization kind of happening, where it would be like, oh, this is me, like when I move my hand, so I can see the reflection moving along with it, so I realize that that is me. But till that time, it's this other thing. So yeah, it's I think, and a lot of us do have a lot of kind of discomforts, right? Like there are, I mean, it's kind. It may be like a little atypical, but we do have. It's never a very straightforward relationship, right? Like even with something as simple as as grind culture, or workout or whatever, like people just trying to, whatever that whole alpha male, whatever, like whole the chat culture or whatever, that whole thing. There is this obsession about our body being a certain way, and if it's not, then it's you know becomes in some way undesirable, or not as like, so all of those sort things kind of pile on, and we all experience it. Like if nothing else, just being fat or thin or something like that, something as simple as that. Like we all experience not being comfortable, and just like if I'm sitting right now, my stomach is kind of slightly bulging against my thighs, I'm feeling it, and it's not. And I wonder, what is this pressure like? What is this uh, I mean, where am I feeling it? Am I feeling it in my thighs? Am I feeling it in my stomach? Am I feeling it in between? So a lot of these like little questions kind of keep popping up whenever I'm doing things, whenever I'm whatever. Like it's just whenever I kind, or rather whenever I pay attention, I realize like there's a body, there's a thing, like there's interactions. Then and when you try to work out, or we try to lift something, or like sex or shit or whatever, like there are all of these things. In these moments, your body doesn't feel like a body. Your body can feel like an extension of yourself, or like a tool, or like all of these things. So those moments again become interesting. So again, it's like the outside the convention a little bit, that we feel our body is a little different. So yeah, I think I'm just trying to kind of explore that extra bit where your body is not how you expect it to be, and it's a little extra or a little less, or not as, let's say, as well put together as you'd hope or want it to be. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a point in time where I realized that like post-human, that I really wanted that, like, to jump into the God box where the like
Yeah.
physics was gone and I could just do whatever I wanted, and that didn't like jive with what I believed about reality, and that I had to
Yeah.
accept having a body. That
Yeah.
was a huge change point for me, and one of my reactions to it was to start exercising. And then at the time I did like mixed martial arts for about a year, because I wanted to put my body into the most uncomfortable positions I could find, and just like
Okay.
reconcile with the fact that like, okay, I'm uncomfortable, I don't get to escape it, I
Yeah.
just have to deal with it. But now you're making me think, oh, that was maybe just one other way for me to try and like take control over it in a sense, which is
Yeah. By the way, I also long time back when I was I think 19 20, I did like mixed MMA for like a couple of years. And yeah, it was I think a similar thing, like trying to figure out what this body is. I mean, I left it after like not just I left it after I realized I don't like getting punched a lot, like like properly punched. I mean, not just in a very safe whatever like a thing, but like a so yeah, I left it there. But I realized like there is this discomfort that I'm trying to control, as you said. Like there is an act of control that you're trying to master your body and you know which which is it's not. I mean, of course, one should like. There is always that tension between trying to control and trying to let things be and let be, let's say, a being or an instinctual like organism, like animalistic, where uh, your subconscious does a lot of things for you, and you can just be in the moment as much as possible. But then the control comes back and you realize like, oh no, I can't, I can't always be an animalistic being, or I can't always be an instinctual person or instinctive person. And so that I think for a lot of us, I think like it's that tension between control and letting go, I think also kind of plays a part in my art, where even when I'm like drawing or like making cartoons or something, like I have to especially I think because I'm thinking of drawing as a tool and not just drawing in as of itself. I have to kind of limit it in a certain way where I mean I can keep on trying to control it, in my paintings I do that a lot, like where I'm trying to control the painting and it keeps getting worse and worse somehow. And sometimes sometimes I'm able to like bring it back, but mostly paintings are ruined. So for me, that in comics it comes down to like where do I let go and how much control do I want. Like if the shape that I've drawn or whatever, this person or this scene that I've drawn, how well can I do it? That's true, and I want to control how well, but at the same time, because it's only like a panel and not the whole thing, I have to move on. I have to. So because of that moving on, or because of whatever deadlines or whatever the hell, like uh, I have to kind of let go. So again, there in that tension, I kind of sometimes have works where I've like in the moment I've drawn the thing and I'm not particularly happy because whatever, like it's not as just as I want it to be. But after like let's say the story is done, I realized like, oh no, because it kind of went bad in this way, I adapted the next panels or the previous panels, or like edited some other part of the comic to kind of make this make sense. So in that way, like letting go also gives me you know um, enough enough to play with as well. Like so it's not just entirely about like it being my thing entirely, and it being just as how I imagined it, but it comes, or rather it becomes this third thing which is a little outside of my control, which is uh, huh, with basically, yeah. So it becomes a little outside of my control, and then I can kind of see it as this third thing. So it's not just mine. So it's not just this object that I made. It's not, like a lot of people say, like, oh, my art is like, my paintings are my babies or something. They're not my babies. They are these distinct objects in the world which exist outside of me, and by understanding that, like it just gives me a little more to play around and not control all the time, even though I do try to control a lot of the time. Like it's
Yeah.
not, yeah, like it's not, it's, I don't know which side wins, but I try to kind of find that balance between instincts and mistakes and control.
That's one of the big things I wanted to talk to you about is the shift, because we both paint, and then we both, it seems like, become more interested in comics. I mean, I've always done comics, but here's some of your paintings that I really liked.
Yeah.
Just grab some screenshots off Instagram, and it's that same like body form stuff. And when we were talking earlier, you were talking about shifting into comics from painting. Is part of the joy of that, of drawing, the speed? Like the speed takes away the need for control?
I think like that's definitely one part of it. Because I have to produce it at a certain speed, whatever, like because of um, also I think because it's a little closer to being a product. I mean, of course, that doesn't make like entire sense. It's just how I kind of make sense of it, rather. I mean, a painting isn't all like if you put a painting in a gallery, it becomes a product again, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I think of it a little more like because it's not, you know, because it's like a comic is only kind of comes into being when it's published in a way. It's like published not by a publisher, but like by the fact that it's printed or put out as a PDF or whatever it is. Uh, so that part definitely also plays, but speed and just the fact that there's so many panels, just the fact that there's so many pages, there is like if I were to um, like that's also one of the things that makes me come like make comics because I there is because of dimensions of the page and dimensions of like time and space and all that, there are other things that are happening which are not like a painting. It's a flat surface and it's in front of you all at the same time, so you're managing it all at the same time. A comic, it's, I mean, you can, a lot of people do try to like do scripts and thumbs and like really pre-produce it as much as possible, uh, but it's still like it's a process. Since it's a process, so there will always be some part which escapes you. But in a painting, I feel like because it's all in front of you, all at the same time, you are always managing it, always figuring out. So the lack of management kind of in comics, which I know, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will disagree because comics is a lot of management. I mean, I don't do it. I just do like two pages at a time or something. Like even if I have like a very broad story or something, like I'll have sometimes I have a narrative, and but I try to never thumbnail or try to never script because that's where like the comicking bit is. Like the comic bit is when you draw, when you put your mark on the paper, and not just that, but when the second panel appears. Like in the first panel is just a drawing. It's just a drawing within a box or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
but when you make that second panel, it's like, oh yeah, okay, this is a comic. So that's where like so for me, comics kind of come into existence in that placement or that juxtaposition or something. So yeah, so that's also one reason why I have this thing like the management and figuring out and not being able to figure out and just making a bit of a mess, like making a bit of a mess. And because I'm trying like constantly escaping it, it's easier to kind of handle like with the speed, with the shapes, with the writing, with everything. Like it just gives me more space to uh, mess around and fuck up and try to like try to get it together a little more like easily, let's say. With painting it's like I don't know, like it's just I think I've also painted for a long time, and and for me, it's just this. I don't know. It's a little hard to put. Like, if I'm looking at my paintings, and yeah, there is. It just feels like there is a lot that I'm trying to do, and when I edit something out, like if I cut something off out, then I have to put something back in. Is that, I don't know if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
but in a comic, I kind of like if I have to cut something out, I don't necessarily, or rather, if I have to add something, I can just in my work, I can just add an extra page. And so many times it happens. Like I've started with like a small 8-page comic, and it kind of balloons to 16 pages, and I'm fine with it. Sometimes the opposite also has happened, whereas whatever, like 20 pager, but then but I've figured whatever I wanted to explore or tell or share in just 12 pages, and I'm fine with that, you know. So there is all that, like it's like all of this. It's just like so many aspects of production are there to kind of where you can play around. It's yeah, I think that's one of the reasons definitely why it's with comics. I mean, outside of again making comics and making stories, but like yeah, as you said, like you mentioned speed. So speed, along with all of these things in a production kind of a way, it becomes an interesting medium again. Yeah.
Yeah, and it opens up room for like surprise for you as the artist, I think. Whereas my experience with painting is that, yeah, I mean, I usually have like a pretty strict plan, but even if I didn't have a plan, you're kind of doing it like one stroke at a time, and then at some point you put the last paint stroke down and you walk away and it's done. But that last paint stroke isn't much different, like the picture's not much different than it was like 4 hours ago. And so there's never like
Yeah.
a cool aha moment. Whereas like playing music, even if it's a song you've played 30 times, I don't know, there's like a constant like now about it that's exciting and magical. And like the way you're talking about comics seems like it has moments for like it to surprise you at any point. Like there's a chance for an aha.
Yeah, I think the time aspect also plays a lot, right?
Yeah.
Where again, let's, as I said, like the painting, like uh, to you as an artist, a painting which is 70% done, a painting which is 100% done is at one point obviously it's wildly different, but also you realize like, oh, now it's going to be like this. I just have to somehow finish it. There's a whole lot of like that. But in comic, because of time, because like there is a lot of like lot in the past and there is a lot in the future. As you said, there is that whole in the now kind of feeling is very there. You know, also like how you read comics, right? Like you kind of keep moving on, and there is. I mean, you don't forget the past, but it's in the past. Let's say, you know, it's not always entirely there. You can't read a comic. I mean, it's the same. I'm guessing for movies also, and like anything that takes time as a dimension to consume or to engage or read. But there is that in the moment kind of a feeling where you can uh, figure it out and just have these. I mean, fun is an oversimplification, maybe not, but fun. They're just having fun, just like having, as you said, surprising also. Trying to just surprise yourself and trying to keep yourself excited with painting. Sometimes, I mean, it does happen, of course. Like if you throw some, like if you throw some paint on the canvas and it drips a certain way, which is not in your control. Of course, you can do it, but in comics, it's a little more obvious just because of the time frame that involves, that it involves. So for me, and with that time frame, with the surprise, I there is a lot where I can kind of tinker around. Like I love in comics also, I love the idea of time, time as space and space as time, with the
Mm-hmm.
way panels behave. So uh, there I can very easily, let's say, and I do this a lot, like where I'll pick a couple of pages, and then I'll start putting panels in different orders.
Mm.
Like, and each different order will produce a different effect, right? Like very simply, like if you have, let's say, something that happens and you see the reaction, so you are then you are let's say a little ahead of whoever the protagonist or whoever the character is. But if you have the reaction first, and then you let's say after turning the page you have the big thing that they are reacting to, suddenly the tone changes. Suddenly it's again, I think a lot of people talk about like the difference between thriller and suspense and all that, right? Like how much you know. So just by shifting like two panels, you've changed the tone of a whole like narrative. And that's only two panels. What if you start messing around with more? What if you add things in which are not necessary, right? Like which kind of which can what if you break the flow of the comic? What if you interrupt? Like it's a decent narrative, but then you start interrupting. What happens? Like uh, so those kind of things again kind of start building interest for me. Like to just mess around with narrative, to mess around uh, with time and tone and beats and like all of these things. Uh, so yeah, so I think hmm. So yeah, so even there is a surprise because I have not thought of those things. I've not like when let's especially when let's say I have a sort of a solid-ish narrative that I've started with, I kind of know where it's going, right? So when I do the edit or when I do the switch or something, it suddenly becomes new to me again, and I have to then again, and it can be a tiring process because then you have to again go back to the first page and see how this new, yeah, but then it's interesting because you can keep on kind of doing it and find iterations, like multiple iterations from the same work. I also, I don't know if you've seen, but I also do these remix comics where, like, I'll take basically panels from a comic that I've already done, but I'll just place them in a different order and maybe write something, or sometimes I don't even write. Just by placing them in a different order, I can see that there is a different narrative at work. There is a different reading that like gets produced. So yeah, so all of these things, like all of this tinkering around, editing, figuring out, yeah, it's definitely like a big part of how I make the work. So the work is never static. Again, so another thing with painting is kind of static when you're done. I mean, again, you can, of course, you can take take a knife or take a scissor at a canvas and clip and make a collage out of it. Of course, you can.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not denying that it's not possible, but in comics, it's just a little more readily available to you. Like the
But
panels are already there.
it would be very different though, because the painting, if you cut it up and collaged it, like it's not accessible to the viewer in the same way that a comic, you could have both side by side. You could have a print of the painting, but you couldn't have the painting and the collage like right next to each other.
Yeah, I think so. That's where I think what I talked about, like comics coming to. I mean, I think comics is kind of made in two states. One is where you put one panel next to the other, and the other is when you compile it and publish. So yeah, as you said, like you can publish an n number of variations, and they'll always be because there is no original. I mean, people do have original art when people do work on paper, etc. But the comic, there is no particular original. Like
Yeah.
so, in that you can have like a product or a work where you'll have like n number of iterations and just I don't know, go crazy with it, please.
That's one of the things that appeals to me about it though, is like that the mass production of it seems to offer me just a way bigger chance to communicate with people. Like I spent so much time painting, and then I would go into a gallery and maybe 100 people would look at it, and they'd look at it for a couple seconds a piece, And that always
Yeah.
seems so disappointing to like a book where I know they're at least going to spend like 10-15 minutes reading it or something like that.
Yeah. Also, like painting after, like, even if you're a successful artist, unless you're like, even if you're, let's say, mildly successful, like decent, whatever, working artist, your painting eventually goes to somebody's house, and that's it. And the
Yeah.
only people who see it are like their guests or whoever they're having over, and that's it. A painting is a very, like, I mean, in that sense, there is that whole sense of the difference between high art, low art, right? Like, it is not as access friendly. It's not, you have to go to the gallery, you have to, you know, be there at a certain time, whatever, few months or few weeks or however long the exhibition is. And after that, like, if you sell the painting, it belongs to these patrons, mostly private people, who, where again the audience, like, it kind of keeps shrinking,
Yeah.
right? Eventually, like, unless you become like a, I don't know, like a mega artist where you have retrospective or whatever, which doesn't happen for most people. So your, the end point is like probably one single person or like a family of people at least, at maximum, just looking at your work, and that's it. And uh, here you have, with comics, you can go really cheap. Like, you can go design like the zine way, right? Like, where you print it for super cheap, like, and just photocopy or whatever the hell. Like, it doesn't, like, even that becomes part of the artifact. Like, let's say if you do a photocopy and it's not the best thing, it suddenly becomes another, like, an art object, and then you kind of take it to like a prestige printer or a prestige publishing house, and then you print it, and it's like really nice paper and whatever, hardcover and all. It has a certain different life. So you can very easily enter different spaces. You know, like, you compile a book, make it a hardcover, you go into the bookstore. But if you want to be at your local fair, just photocopy, just print it at your home printer, and you'll have like these, I don't know, $1-2 kind of zines which you just sell, like, to anybody and everybody, right? So that, I think, I mean, I don't know how democratic it is, but it certainly feels more democratic than a painter. So that, yeah, like, that the part that it is democratic, the part that it is like, you know, and you can print it wherever. I mean, of course, there is some technology. I know there are, I've heard of people arguing about weird things like, oh, you need to, like, to be able to make a zine, you need to have certain privileges because you need access to printer and whatever, photocopier, which is a weird argument. Obviously, you need the technology, but with the technology, you can do a lot. Like, you can
But
do a lot for a lot of people.
that's a pretty low requirement for entry. I mean, there may be some people who can't, but I would imagine the majority of people now could go to a copy shop. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And also, like, if you're making art, and it's anyways some sort of a privilege, right? Like, of course, like, so the moment you enter that discussion, you get into very uncomfortable spaces where, like, why, like, oh, people don't even have time from their job, so, you know, like, so privilege is like, it's something where kind of it becomes a little tricky to talk about. But otherwise, it's to me, it has felt like the most democratic kind of a thing where I can reach the most number of people, and in different kind of ways, you know, like, even on Instagram and like, or whatever, or Twitter, etc. Like, I put most of my, I think the only comics that I've not put are the ones are which will definitely get me banned or something, like, or yeah, so those are the only one. But everything else I put because, you know, like, there is so much, and people do interact with it pretty regularly, and people seem to keep having like different readings of the work constantly. So yeah, so that interaction, the constant interaction is, I don't know, seems very interesting to me. Like, it's, I would definitely, in that sense, as much as I love painting too, uh, I think that just just having it be available to people, I don't know, it's just, there is more to be done. Like, there's more rather that you can. I mean, people already do it a lot, but yeah, yeah,
do,
painting, yeah.
do you
Sorry, go
feel
ahead.
like that constant, especially being on Instagram and you're like every time you post something, you get constant feedback? Does that evolve your work quicker because of the inability to interact with the public?
Uh, so I don't think I take the readings, like I appreciate the readings and the multiple ways that people read, but I I I do try to not pay a lot of attention to it, in the sense that uh, I think because people are kind of, when in the reading, like when you read anything, you have your own expectations, right? Like even when I read something, if I'm reading something, if I look at the cover, I expect it to be something, and that colors my experience. Or let's say if this whatever comic or author or writer comes recommended by a friend, it will have a different expectation. So I try not to do too much. Like I try not to get into people's reading or like too much, because that's coming sort of from the the outside.
Yeah.
So I think the only thing that I try to like, I think the only thing it does is like just give me, I don't know, burst of dopamine. Like that's about it. Like, oh, I get likes, somebody's happy with it. The validation is for me as a person, because like I need that whole, like whatever, that appreciation or whatever. But my work, when I work, I try to not let it enter the work as easily. Or even if it does, then it has to get through my filter. Like if, let's say, even if somebody has a brilliant, well-meaning comment, I will think about it and see if I need to take something back to my work. So that process of filtration is always there. That I'm not constantly uh, adjusting to how people are reacting. Sometimes though it's the opposite. Like sometimes I see a work is kind of popular, but not, let's say, in a way that I wanted it to be. So I have this. I'm sure you might feel as an artist too, like this need or drive to go the opposite way. Like fuck you all, and like I'll just like next work will be stupid or weird, or like I'll try to upset all of you. I mean, sometimes again, it's not. I obviously when I'm making the work, I do hold back that thought, but it does come to me like, oh, let me, and not to upset people rather, but to just uh, I think that's just like the angsty kind of teen part of me which comes out sometimes.
Yeah.
Like even with appreciation or something, but if it's not, like, oh, it's not appreciated the right way, oh, I meant it to be. So i I do have those feelings, but then I kind of like, then I do try to also reconcile it with the fact that, of course, like different readings make the work more interesting, and it will be boring. Like if the work is very, or rather, if the readings are all similar, like if everybody just, even if to appreciate, right? If everybody's like, oh, this is the best thing in the world or whatever, or in the moment at least, even that's not going to be interesting. Like what is interesting is what the reader brings to it. What is interesting is the way something as simple as the Instagram interface kind of makes you view the thing, right? Like you have to swipe it, and there is a certain like user interface that kind of comes between you and the thing. So all of those things, and those readings do give me a lot, but it's not. But try to I do try to make it like through, like it has to kind of go through me to enter the work. It can't just directly enter the work.
Yeah. One of the things I find most disappointing is that the like my sketches, which to me are like they're too easy, like they come to me too easy. That's the
Hmm.
stuff that people really like gets
Uh,
more likes. And I'm like, I'm
yeah,
just
yeah, I
like
know what you mean.
messing around. And then the stuff that I like labor and labor over where I'm really trying to communicate something seems to get less kind of
Yeah, yeah, that
interaction. And one of the things I really loved about your work was I've never known what to do with the type of thing I do when I doodle. And your
Hmm.
work like has that kind of mushed together, morphed forms that to me is just my doodling. And it kind of said, oh, you can do something with this. And it maybe let me see myself from the outside, like, oh, this is what people are reacting to. Because I said, this is just like some stupid trick that I do that, and I've never understood that. So you've really put me thinking, okay, maybe there is something to this subconscious doodling that I think is too easy, where I can do something more complicated with it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there is something to that. I mean, first of all, I do understand that frustration, right? Like I have it. It happens, I think, to all artists that you work hard on something and then it gets whatever, like, and then a random sort of sometimes weird, sometimes conventional work gets a lot of likes and appreciation and everything, and that messes you up. But the other part about it being instinctive, or like let's say the doodles, I think there the fact that you're doodling something, that means that there is something extra there, right? Like you're doodling not out of an intent to produce a work or something. There is, so I think it I would I would totally support you trying to figure that out, like, trying to just see where this doodling comes from or kind of where it goes to. Like even with my own shapes and all, a lot of times the sketches just come. Like I'm just doing, like I'm trying to do a variation of shapes and just seeing which one sticks better. That's it. And and then kind of just see how, like, of course, as you go on with the narrative, it becomes harder and harder to doodle
Mm-hmm.
because the context is already there, and there is a certain force to make some sense, not a lot of sense, but some sense. So it does become harder, but at the same time, like these shapes can inform a lot, like uh, without them making a lot of very like a conscious sense. I have, like sometimes I'm really happy at times when like I've made like a weird doodle, and then people put their meaning into it, and like I've made this shape, and they're like, oh, this is, I can totally feel like a guy crying, whatever, I don't know, something,
Yeah.
anything. So those kind of doodles or those kind of shapes, which I know that I just did it, and it's something. I have some intentions. I'm not myself 100% clear, but the fact that you kind of give, you as in you being the reader, gives, like, or rather the reader thinks that because I've produced the work, I've probably thought about it or something like that. They themselves put meaning into it, right? Like, so even like a very weird design certainly has certain life and certain gesture, certain movement, where if you if you probably would just see it randomly, would probably just miss it. But the fact that it's in context to, let's say, the page or like my post or like next to some panels, suddenly brings a new meaning. Like I do this thing a lot of times where I do like a pretty realistic like image, like some object, like a tree or whatever, like a thing, and then I put like a doodle next to it, and it suddenly, the doodle kind of makes sense. It suddenly has an extra sense that I've glommed onto it, right? Like, so yeah, I would definitely recommend, like, for you to just, I don't know, just mess around with these doodles that you're like, just do something with them. It's been very interesting.
It sounds though like most of your things come some not pre-planned, but they're coming from some observation that you make first and then develop into a story, or do you just start drawing sometimes and let it go where it goes?
Ah, So, so what I try to do with narrative is that there'll be a very, very loose thread. Like with, let's say, interrogation, um, the idea was just the simple thought that I had that this woman comes back to her house and finds her partner dead and does not know what to do with it. Like, because the body is the partner, but it's not the partner anymore. So she's trying to, uh, like, in some sort of a ritualistic, like, she tries to concoct a ritual. Or actually, no, it started as just that. Like, she basically realizes that the body is there, but the partner is gone. Like, so it's a, so then basically, so from there, the story kind of emerges that after you're dead, like what happens to your body, right? Like, so what happens to, or is the body, again, the question back to, if our body is like, if my body is me, but then what, like, how does it relate to me after I'm dead, or let's say when I'm in a coma, or with whatever, not in control, is the body still me? And definitely after the, after death, right? That, whose body is it? I mean, if you, let's say, if you're on a donor list, it belongs to the, those institutions. If it's, if you don't have anything, then it probably belongs to your family, right? So it's not yours then.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that story started from that point, that like she just comes and discovers and realizes the body is her partner's, but the partner is not there. It was just that, and then I kind of tried to figure out uh, like what it means to have a body, and how would, so then while I was working, I kind of came to the realization that, like, funerals, are like these elaborate rituals where we are trying to understand death, like the person who's died, but also our life, and try to figure out what to do literally with this body. So there is this whole thing, like either you're cremating or you're burying or whatever. So we have these elaborate rituals. How is, so then it came back to, as I was working, like, so it came back to this person trying to create her own ritual to capture something. But she was not trying to capture, like, a lot of ritual for a lot of people is about, oh, respect for the dead, blah, blah. For her, it was like, no, like the body is something. The blood of the partner is something, right? Like the sweat of the partner, whatever, no, all of these things, at one point they belong to the person. So do they still not belong? So there it kind of, as I was working, it kind of built on and took on different meaning about ritual, about obsession, about body, about control, and it kind of sort of, a meaning was sort of like, it sort of snowballed out of it in a way, like from this little idea. So usually it's like that, like it's a very slim, like a, usually the idea is like one line at maximum. Sometimes it's not, sometimes I just write a couple of words, and then it, while I'm making something, I'm like finding meaning. But also I think, like, after a while you're working on the thing, you also retroactively start giving to the earlier bits, like retroactive give meaning to the earlier bits, and everything starts feeling like one thing. So it does, it may eventually, like after your, rather when somebody reads the work, it may feel like there is like a lot of continuous observation, but it's just me trying to, after the fact, trying to, sometimes, a lot of times, after the fact, like making sense of what I've drawn or what I thought I had. You know?
Yeah, I think like the art that I'm happiest with for myself is the stuff where the process of making it is where I start answering questions for myself.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
there's even times where I go in thinking I know the answer and I'm like trying to give an answer, but by the time I'm done with it, I usually think like the opposite of where I started. And I feel like that's what art is for me, is the way that I ask and answer questions for myself. And if other people get something out of it, then I'm happy. But like, that's why I'm doing it pretty much.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't think, to me, works where it seems like the artist, obviously, those, so works where the artist has, it seems like a predefined stance on something, they're not as interesting to me. Of course, they have a space in the world, like, of course, like, people need to interact with those kind of works too. But personally, to me, a lot of those works aren't very interesting, where the artist has their whole politics and their whole ideology figured out before they're like, and they're just letting, like, the only thing that the work is doing is just illustrating a point. Like, they
Yeah.
already have an argument, they already have a take, and the work is just an illustration. To me, that's not particularly interesting. It doesn't make sense. Why would you, like? Why not just write a very simple statement about it? Why not, like, it making, like, just illustrating? Then, yeah, it kinds of gets into those. I mean, I'm not going to say didactic. I'm kind of didactic, not entirely, but it is in that realm where I am just telling you what's right in a certain way. I'm not personally interested in that. Like, I want to figure out. I want to not judge. I want to have space where, even if, let's say, I had some preconceived notion, that I should be able to rule it out and negate it and, like, question it. If I don't do that, it's not particularly interesting. Even while thinking, right? Like, if you're just, as we said, like, if you're just justifying your thoughts, that's not very interesting. It's just you trying to kind of make sense of the world in a very limiting kind of way. I want to l- produce work where meanings are multiple, and, like, where there is not just like open-ended questions, but just that if two people were to see it, they would have seemingly different understanding of the thing, including myself. Like, including, let's say, when after a while, I read the work and I realize, well, it's not exactly how I started it, like, started it. Uh, so, so as you were saying, like, um, that question, like, the questioning and answering and going over and figuring out is it's a vital part of what makes art kind of have an effect in the world. Like, a lot of people talk about, like, art, like, art changes the world, but it's never really in the way that we think. For a lot of people, the idea of art changing a world is like some magical painting which will, get the people to rise and whatever. That's not like that. Usually does not happen. What gets people to rise is collective effort. Art is not there for to do that. you know Art is there for you to question. Like, if I can get, like, even, I mean, not even that, but like, if a person can just question some kind of a simple status quo kind of a, or whatever, like a normally held belief, if they can just question it or just be critical of it, like, that's more than, like, if a piece of artwork can do, like, one of that for one person, it's done a lot already,
Yeah.
as long as you're kind of keeping it open.
D- I as a younger artist, like, definitely worked in the didactic mode, and people would
Hmm.
criticize me for it, and I'd like, well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to explain stuff. And as I got older, then I started realizing that that's just not as interesting or sophisticated. And I think a lot of that for me happened during my schooling. And I'm definitely with
Hmm.
your painting and your thoughts on art. I'm curious about like your background in art, your schooling, if you've had any, or
uh so as per usual, like I drew as a kid, like as most kids do. I just kept on drawing. I remember there was this, I think, in some seventh, eighth standard while I was, I don't know, 11, 12 years old. Like there is that whole, like not a questionnaire, but like the teachers or whoever, or the substitute teacher, like they'll randomly ask, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? So I remember saying cartoonist when I was like 11 or 12, even though I
Okay.
had no idea what a cartoonist did, like other than draw, like I did not uh, know what more there was to cartooning, but I had this image of like a me cart like making cartoons and kind of kept drawing. Uh, it kept happening, but like so I was, but eventually I started not being very good at like
It kept
schooling.
happening. Oh
Just
no.
yeah, exactly. So it was almost like a again like a compulsion, like a process, like this whole impulsive things. Like
Uh,
I remember my parents having to like they would take my sketchbooks away because I would draw, and they would also take my pencils away. So I started drawing in the back of my notebooks with a pen, and then they would sometimes they would check, sometimes they wouldn't, and then it got to the point that I was so disinterested in studies that I would draw literally while like if there was some exam happening, I was literally drawing in the middle of the exam. So sometimes on the question paper, a lot of times, eventually it got to the point like where I was drawing on the answer sheet because I just did not have interest in like answering. I would fail a lot. So I think so. After also like by kind of the system being like this, where you're not able to or you're not really kind of encouraged to make like art. I was skeptical of colleges, and so I didn't do any colleges. Like I didn't go to any college. I was just thought like it's enough to. And so this was back in what 2004, 5, something like that. There was already internet. There were already these YouTube videos. There were already these channels and people who were teaching art, who were teaching drawing, and there used to be like a bunch of art forums and all. If you were
mhm.
like in those parts of the internet. So there was a lot already. So I felt like I didn't need to do any formal, like just do any formal education. Just had some friends who I kind of drew with. Some of them I still am like very good friends with, and we still draw together and all. But yeah, so it wasn't very formal. It was just me mm, trying to just draw, just constantly draw. Like yeah, I draw a lot. Like it was so at some points of time it was pretty unhealthy. Like while I should have been out partying, I was just drawing, and like so yeah, that was a pretty common thing that kept happening. Yeah.
I like
So
that you
and then it's
describe it as like, yeah, it just kept happening. I don't know what's going on. Like it's just that.
yeah, exactly, because I had no control. Like I just wanted to keep on drawing. Like I would not when a parental figure or like parent or teacher or somebody would try to be like why like like oh give more time to studies or something. I just like that statement of theirs just did not like I was not able to compute that statement. I was like, if I
Yeah.
like drawing, why can't I just keep drawing constantly? Like it just and I still have a problem with that question. Like if I like doing, I understand like balance of life or whatever the fuck, and having like your things in order, of course, but like on a very instinctive level it still doesn't make sense. Like if I like doing this, then I should want to keep like I will keep doing this like till something kind of comes in interrupts or interjects. So
Well,
still I think yeah.
no, sorry. Before we started recording, you said that you had been working like corporate jobs for the last however many years, and now you're
Yeah.
like, screw that, I'm going on vacation and I'm drawing. And
Yeah.
um
uh,
like how did you get to the point where you could do that, or you like felt brave enough to jump into that?
well okay, so I wasn't brave enough. Let's make it clear.
Okay.
uh, so I work basically in this company where we design hotels, and Well, during pandemic, the whole hoteling kind of industry shut down. A lot of companies went under. Ours also kind of did. So I got laid off. So that was the thing. The only good
Okay.
thing was that I had some money saved up, and that my company had, like, they gave a good enough severance. So I had some money. So I was able to just not care about money coming in, or like I had enough basically to get me through the pandemic and not worry too much about my financials.
Okay.
So that's just how it started. Like, it's very simple. Like, I wasn't being brave. Probably had Corona not happened, I might there is like a parallel timeline where I'm still working there, still designing hotels, still cribbing about not making art, but like doing it in a really nice, I don't know, like a high end restaurant or something, like while eating, I don't know, expensive food. But right now though, I'm in a studio kind of making art. So yeah, that's all. Yeah.
And
Very
so is
simple.
that when you like really leaned back into the comics and hooked up with Strangers Publishing and all of that?
Uh no. So I think in 2020, after I got laid off, I tried making a couple of comics. They didn't go down well. They, I think, I mean, obviously, like it's like any other field. It's you have to practice. You can't just. I mean, there are some people who when they pick up a new medium, it's like it was theirs all along. But for a lot of us, it's about practice. So I tried making a couple of comics, which will never see the day of light, the light of the day, and so I kind of was on the verge of quitting comics in 2020. Like, it's a lot. Like, obviously we were all going through a lot. So
Yeah.
my lot was this. Like, I was going through a breakup, and like I was failing comics, like these 50, 60 odd pages of comics, which nobody will ever see. I and just thinking I'd like let myself down, let my art down, all that, like all the whole like the troubled artist shit. But then I think in there was this 24-hour comic event that happened. So I was like, oh, let me, what, before giving up entirely, let me just do this one thing. And then I made this comic. It kind of came out interesting. And some of my friends and some of my uh, like peers and like people I respected kind of liked it. So from there, it kind of built on. And then, uh, then I started messing around like formally, and like thought about like bringing my poetry influence and like a lot of literary influence and thought and art and cartooning, and kind of mash them together. So so sometime in 2021, basically after having done a few of these comics, I contacted like a few people, as you do, right? When you have some work, like, can you submit or something? So I wanted to basically submit just a small, like, 4 pager in Strangers magazine. But I think they'd seen my work, and they just want, like, they were basically, they just Eddie just asked me, like, why not just, like, you have enough work, if we add like one or two stories, we'll have like a small book, so why not just do that? So that's how, like, it kind of came about.
No, that's awesome. Bless them for doing that because it's a work that
Yeah,
deserved
yeah,
to be published.
yeah, yeah,
S-
yeah, it is amazing. Yeah.
so prior to 2020, you had not really worked on comics much. You were mostly interested in drawing and painting.
Well, I had worked in comics long time back, I think in 2008 and 9 and all that. But again, so I was trying to do sort of experimental works, but I mean, I do think that some of the now that those works are little limited. But again, the same thing, that with a sort of an experimental work, like, there is always that danger that it will not, like, people will just look at it as like this point of intrigue and then move on. So that happened quite a bunch to my comics back then. I mean, again, like, I don't think they're great comics, but I was trying things. I was trying to not do like the regular whatever, the mainstream kind of stuff, and it kept failing. So basically after a point of trying, I just kind of gave up, because like how you just like as a young artist, you think you have a lot, but then you realize like, oh no, there is only that much gas in the tank, and you have to kind of like, I mean, you can keep on keeping on and keep on like doing it, but some sort of like a sense prevailed, and I thought like, oh, let me just do comics, or let me use my skills for like illustration, etc. So I kept doing like these smaller comics, but they're not. I mean, they're not there on the internet. Like they're just somewhere. So, but I never done it as seriously as I'm doing it right now. And I don't think I also had the uh, like things hadn't clicked for me also in the way that they are. Like to like for me, comics were one thing, painting was another, writing was another, cartooning, like literally making cartoons was another. So it was like everything was like in its own silo. So there was comics, but they were like just in one section. So now I think I'm much more kind of trying to bring those things together and work with like a lot of my different influences and interests.
Yeah, that was something I had to go through too, like doing the more experimental comics and then that leading me to painting. And then I was like, I did painting and I would do like a little short comic every now and then, but I almost needed to get that larger viewpoint. And then at some point it's like, okay, now I want to bring that back. But it's still difficult to like, are there any keys that you're finding that are helping you integrate all of the things? Because I still have the trouble of seeing them like as different. Like there's these things that I say if I'm working with painting that are different than the things I would say with comics.
I think it's still a struggle. I think the struggle is to bring things together, right? Like because you don't want it to be a very conventional, like especially you even you as an artist, I'm gathering, like you don't want it to be like you probably wouldn't want to make a comic that gets optioned by Hollywood. Like probably that's not of a lot of interest to you. So a lot of maybe I'm just assuming, let's say, or
If they
rather
if
let
they
me
want to
address
give
it.
me money, I'll take it.
Of course, I'll take the money. I'll definitely take the money, like any day, for sure. Like we're in indie scene, we need the money. But uh, but you're not like trying to make work which is conventional in some way. So the struggle is constantly to figure out how things come together, and like a comic shouldn't just obviously be a comic. It could have, like, to me, I think uh, bringing in some sense of poetry and some sense of like literary kind of thing that helped a lot, because like in poetry, the way it's kind of built, right? Like it's in a way very conducive to comics because things are not continuous. Things are not like it's not regular prose or something. There are moments and then there are skips, and then the reader is supposed to figure out the in between. So that was one thing that really got me going with like for like one element which made me figure out like okay, probably I can do it like what if I treat comics a little like poetry, that things don't have to entirely make sense, and 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 hope that the reader does. So that was one definitely breakthrough. I think the other was also where I realized that another way to not do a conventional comic is really lean in on your compulsions again, like the body or whatever, the sex, body, all of these things. Uh, a lot of people, while talking about these things, get into like weird spaces of judgment and moral high ground, whatever, like etc. etc. And I didn't want to get into that, so I kind of put that aside. I was like, basically, I thought, and this happened after like talking to a few friends also, like who themselves do very transgressive works, where it made sense to just really lean in and figure it out rather than making it like I decided against making it palatable to a certain audience or certain type of audience. I just kind of let it, like the work will land where it lands, and the consequences of the work, good or bad, will come however they do. It doesn't make a lot of sense to worry about it, especially in an indie space. Like, I don't know, like obviously if I was in like YA or like mainstream or something, then obviously these questions come in, like who is reading, how are they reading it, what is acceptable, what is printable. But I'm in an indie space, and where almost anything goes, right? Uh, but I didn't want to again use that space to just do whatever. Point is still to do something which is of interest to me. So just not worrying too much about like what people will think, and just really, really thinking about like what uh, I want to delve into, kind of made it, and like thinking about poetry and thinking about thought, just kind of bringing them together. Um, just kind of made it work. Like also with cartooning, like I realized that with cartooning, I mean a lot of people have already done it. That cartooning, um, you use a cartoon, but then you talk about something else, which is not obviously like a topic of a typical gag comic. So that was also like an interesting kind of space where I took things from. That I'll make it like 4 panels, structure of a gag comic, but it will not be a gag. It'll be like there will be some gags just to kind of keep you in guessing just enough, but there'll be a lot of non-gags, a lot of anti-gags where I can talk about other things and kind of play with expectations in that sense. So just it was just a lot of this bringing together all of these very disparate kind of things.
And you're talking about cartooning and comics as kind of like interwoven but separate, like that cartooning is a different skill set, it sounds like.
Yeah, what I mean literally by cartooning is like Bugs Bunny or whatever, or like Fleischer Brothers or whatever, like all of these things, like just cartooning as the shape, like the simplified shape that we, when let's say a very common person who doesn't read comics, when you tell them a cartoon, they think of like a big head, big
Yeah.
eyes, big nose, all like the generic cartoon. So that sense of cartooning, but also coming from the cartooning tradition, right? Like with Peanuts or with Crazy Cat, or even later on with people like Chris Ware, etc., or Jim Woodrick, all of these people, they've already were there is this sort of semi, like it's sort of, it's a tradition within a tradition where they are using the cartoon form, but then they kind of take it to different places. Chris Ware would deal with loneliness and nostalgia. Woodrick would deal with like a lot of surrealist things. So the moment like his character interacts with like a surreal creature. So to me, it was, I was also following that line, but
Mm-hmm.
then kind of infusing other things like poetry and my own interests along, like I was trying to make them meet kind of also. So a little separate to regular drawing for comics, just like this very, not very, but a sort of a narrower tradition within comics.
Yeah, like the animated kind of abstracted, exaggerated qualities of it.
Yes, yes. I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, there'll be somebody like an Al Columbia, right? Like who's again the same shit, very cartoon, but then
Yeah.
he perverts it with his own, like an interesting way of perverting it, and
Yeah.
he does other things with it. So I was kind of picking on that line, basically.
Awesome. I wanted to go back to something you said a while ago. You were talking about these remix comics you do. Where are those just going out on your Instagram or?
Yeah, they're on. I don't. Maybe like if I sometimes like if I have enough, maybe I'll think of printing them up. But right now they're all on Instagram.
Oh,
So if
okay.
you
Because
want
I
to,
was
yeah,
you're referencing if I like asking if I had seen them or not. It's like I don't know if I've seen those or not. Where are they at?
yeah, because obviously, like you have, like if you, I'm sure it must have happened for a lot of people also, because you've seen the panel, so it will be like, oh, I've seen this already. It may be a re-upload or something like that, but mostly it's like me just messing around, like with a tinkering around with a few things and just trying to give it a new shape.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and look at those because I probably was like, oh yeah, I've read that one before. Um,
Yeah.
I think on Instagram with
Let
the
me know.
swiping, it's a little harder to catch on to that. But
Yeah, yeah.
maybe that's the right format for it too, because you get them one at a time. It is more like a song passing by or something.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely like if you scroll by, you miss it, and it's totally fine. Like it's not like I'm not like holding it like as some prestige product. It's just me messing around with these things, and if you catch on, you catch on, and that's totally fine. And
That's an
if you don't, that's also good. Yeah.
that's an interesting experiment. I want to check it out. So, are you working on new work towards publication, or what can people besides everyone running out and getting Dear Mother, which is now in its second
Yeah, it's in
printing,
second
right?
print. Yeah. Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
other than that, what are some things that people can look forward to from you and ways that they can support you?
I think for now, I'll be a lot of these smaller comics. I keep putting them out on Instagram. So if you're on social media, follow me there. But also, I plan to have a book out by the end of this year. It'll be a little longer. I'm hoping for it to be a little longer. So there is one main like a lead story, the same way how the previous one was. That there is one lead story, and there'll be a bunch of smaller comics. We're trying to make it color. Let's see. That'll be interesting since I've been messing around with color also for a while. So that probably will come by the end of the year if everything goes to plan. Um, I'll be doing like I'm doing a bunch of these smaller comics for various anthologies. So again, you like if you come on Instagram, there'll be some post or update about it. But then I think bunch of like 4 10 pages, 4 5 6 pages, whatever, like those kind of things for different anthologies. Or hopefully there'll be yeah. So that will probably keep happening through the year. Like every few months, you will probably see my work in some anthology or the other. And
Awesome.
yeah,
I'm glad to hear it.
yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you're
Thank
going into color too, because the color stuff I've seen going up on Instagram really add,
you. Mm,
because you're such a powerful composer. Like each
mm.
unit of the panel is such a powerful composition, and then what you're throwing in with colors really adding to that. So I'm excited to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
Uh, yeah. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Color is um, definitely like another way to just again explore different things. Like I'm very interested in moods and patterns and like what if you put the same color in two different situations, but that gives different meaning and all that. So I want to see where. I mean, I've already done it in the smaller pieces, but I want to see how I can kind of use it for a longer narrative and should be interesting. I think. I mean, I hope it's interesting.
yeah, it'll be interesting to work with those kind of shifts over a book. Like you're talking about
Hmm.
poetry and stuff, the music and poetry of the color shifts throughout a book will be really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Well, that's
yeah. I
awesome.
hope it is. Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
I'm really looking forward to it. For viewers who are listening along, if you have not got it, definitely go get yourself a copy of Dear Mother and Other Stories from Strangers Publishing. It's not an easy work by any means. It's difficult, but it's difficult in the best way. And Bhanu, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about it. It like your work and talking to you is opening up like new avenues in my head. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like it was, I think we've already talked a little on Instagram, so it's just nice to kind of build up on that also, like just conversation building upon that.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me and having me.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.